Welcome to today's live presentation of More Than Just Technology, Embracing Classrooms for Online Training. Audio for our event will be broadcasted through your computer speakers. If you would like the option to dial in to listen, please call 877-201-7923. Today's presentation is hosted inside an Adobe Connect virtual meeting room with integrated AudioOne audio conferencing. We invite you to learn more about hosting your own events with MeetingOne's tailored conferencing solutions during a brief Adobe Connect demo at the conclusion of this presentation. We are delighted to have you join us today, and we hope that you enjoy our live presentation and our host, David Smith of Virtual Gurus. Welcome, David, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And thank you to each and every single one of you that's going to take this next hour out of your day to actually sit and join me in this webinar, very kindly hosted by MeetingOne. You know, and I love doing these kind of events because for me, this is a kind of way of me being able to almost in a way pay it forward to you as an audience. You know, you've embarked on a virtual classroom journey where, you know, as we look at these polls, some of you just starting to learn about using virtual classrooms. Definitely some of you already getting into it. Others, you know, have actually looked at how we upskill our facilitators, our designers to use virtual classroom. But we're going to talk today about how we can embrace virtual classrooms. You know, there's a real challenge for us in terms of how we actually make it much more acceptable and understandable, much more usable. And as we go through today's session, I definitely want to be giving you a lot in terms of paying it forward. You know, when I sort of think about it and think about this world of virtual classrooms, it's something I've been doing now for about 10 years. And, you know, over the years, the research has kind of told us that organizations are pretty much looking at this technology and saying, great, let's put it in place. So it might be Adobe Connect, it might be one of the other platforms. But let's just put it in place and let's start delivering learning out to our people. And, you know, there's some research that's been done. This is back to a few years, the e-Learning Guild, where they actually said that this was an audience of about 3,500 people that were using these technologies, and they said that 90% of that audience felt the tools weren't being used to their full potential. 68% of the audience actually went on to say that many people in my organization just don't realize or understand these virtual classroom tools that we're using. And ultimately, and this for me is the saving grace, is that 88% of that audience recognized that if we design and deliver great virtual classroom delivery, in other words, you've upskilled your people, you've actually used instructional designers that are designing training that's going to be delivered in the virtual classroom, then those sessions can be every bit as effective as face-to-face training. And that, for me, holds out a lot of hope for us, really, in terms of thinking, well, okay, we need to embrace these technologies. You know, we're having these challenges where, you know, our learners are much more dispersed than maybe they've ever been before. You know, the globalization of our businesses, we might be training audiences in Asia Pacific or in Latin America or Europe, and you may still be just based in the US. You know, so we've got this need to actually reach out to more dispersed audience, and the reality is the nature of that dispersed audience means that we've got to leverage virtual classroom a lot more and able to actually be much more efficient with our training delivery. You know, we're going to actually take a look today at a number of different things really around how we can actually get our virtual classrooms being much more accepted by the organization. Some of the tips and best practices. What are some of the ways we can actually get our people thinking about using these technologies? And before we do that, I want to just get you thinking about, well, yeah, we know that the virtual classroom actually gives us this benefit of, it helps us to reduce our travel costs, because it means that we don't have to take those groups of learners and transport them around the world and have the associated travel cost and hotel expense. And, you know, I kind of like to think that now virtual classrooms, we know that the one key benefit that most organizations will get is the fact that we're going to reduce travel costs. I want to say that's a given. But what I'd like you to do is in the poll that we've got for me, just share with me, what do you within your organization see personally as being the benefits of using or moving your training online? We're going to take about a minute to ask you to fill that in. I do want to remind you that during the session, I'm here to present and give you a lot of information, a lot of knowledge, but I also want to make it personal to you. So if you have any questions around using virtual classrooms, put them into the Q&A panel. We'll pick them and we'll stop a lot as we go along. There might be times where that's much more pertinent to a later section, so I'll answer it then. But I'll look to answer almost every question that you actually send that in to me. If you look at these polls and look at some of the results, yeah, we're going to save time. We're definitely going to be doing that. We're going to reach a larger audience. We might be able to schedule our learning in a slightly more easier or much more flexible way. At Virtual Gurus, as we think about moving training online, it is about that reach and getting out to a much more extended audience. It is about reducing out-of-office time. And I want to get you thinking that it's reducing out-of-office time not just for the learner, but also you as the facilitator. I'm sure we've all had those days of being, or we may still have them, of being a face-to-face facilitator who's going from taxi to airport to conference room, to taxi to airport to conference room, and just continually doing that vicious circle. It helps us to support learning for our remote workers. There's going to be audiences that we have which, may be fairly remote locations. As you're probably all aware, these technologies need an internet connection, a computer, and then either a computer headset or a telephone to join the session. It's going to help us to reduce our overall training costs as a company. We're not having to spend the time developing content in the same way. We're not going to need to move our facilitators around the world. I'm going to suggest to you that Virtual Classroom will improve your training quality. If you consider in a face-to-face training event, I would actually naturally have my notes available to me. I would maybe have them on a lectern on the front table at the side of the room. I might refer to them infrequently. In a virtual classroom, I can refer to my notes all the time if I'm not on webcam. The audience can't see me doing that. It's very much, as some of you said there, it's going to help us to speed up the response to our training needs. And very much thinking about our planet, we can reduce our carbon footprint as a result. So thanks very much in terms of looking at that and giving me a lot of great responses, a lot of great answers. But for me, Virtual Classroom is really us getting to a stage, this evolution of learning, if you like, where we've been working for many years now with both traditional as well as digital learning. If you think about the phrase, digital is purely putting learning online where it becomes a digital asset. So it might be a PDF, it might be a video, it might be a narrated PowerPoint. We've been doing that for a lot of years now. The whole sense of putting content into a learning management system, we might be using things like CrossKnowledge or Skillsoft or lynda.com. That's what I refer to very much as digital learning. But virtual learning, for many, is just starting to come into, I'm not going to say fashion because it's not about being fashionable here. It's just coming into favor. And really, what I think we're starting to move towards is to actually get the true blending of the learning. And when I actually think about that, it reminds me about an actual article I picked up quite recently from Josh Bersin of Bersin Deloitte. And this article was talking about the corporate learning technology market needing to take a bit of a turn. And you can download that article by clicking on that link that you can see at the bottom of the slide, then go browse to, and it'll open up your web browser. Don't go off and read it right now. You can actually do that later. But it's quite interesting because it talks to the fact that the traditional learning management system has got to change. We've got to not reinvent learning, but I do think that what we've got to do is to start blending the learning in a much more efficient way than we have been. Up till now, we've maybe done a bit of an e-learning sandwich. It's been a bit of digital learning ahead of time. It's the face-to-face traditional workshop, and then a bit of e-learning behind it, or more digital. That's not truly blending. If we think about it as we are learning architects, like an architect who builds a condominium or a tower block, They have a lot of different resources, materials, and assets available to them, and they don't always build the tower block in the same way with the same materials. They change it up. There's variety there. There's reasons why they'll actually go with maybe digital as opposed to virtual. And we'll talk a little towards that a little later on with you as well. So when we actually think about this true blending, it's really for us as the architects to actually move into a different realm in terms of the way we design and deliver the training itself. Excuse me. So what we actually need to think about is that the technology, so if you're about to deploy something like Adobe Connect, technology is just the plug and play part of the virtual classroom. When you actually think about the technology itself, it's where we provide this experience, if you like, for our learners. An experience, hopefully, that actually allows that knowledge transfer to take place. And I've got up here, it's where the knowledge transfer should take place. Unfortunately, I think sometimes we actually get in the way of that happening. And that could be that what we're actually doing is we're not actually making the content that engaging. A large part of what I speak about in terms of conferences and learning events is around how do we actually engage with these modern learners. If you actually just pull up a PowerPoint slide, push it along the screen and talk to people, they're not going to be engaged with you. You may think that knowledge transfer has taken place, but there's an old phrase that content shared is not necessarily content learned. We need to actually engage with our audience. We need to make these sessions interactive so that they're beyond the talking PowerPoint head. And we definitely want to be making these virtual classroom sessions impactful. And when I actually think about that, I think about it from the point of view that we actually need to take our virtual classroom sessions from good to great. We want to take them to a state where the audience sees virtual classroom as being a great option for delivering the learning. One that's engaging, one that's interactive, one that they enjoy. And I really think we have to do that. In order to do that, I actually think about virtual classroom as being a little bit like a three-legged stool. If you think about a three-legged stool, and we think about it from the point of view that we've got one leg here, which is the virtual classroom platform itself, so Adobe Connect. Add to that, we need to know how to use the platform tool set. So how to use the chat, the whiteboarding, absolutely everything else. That's the second leg. And then the third leg is actually developing the virtual classroom skills, not just for facilitator and for designer, but for everyone. And I truly think that if we don't think about these three legs, what's actually going to happen to it, just like that three-legged stool, it's going to wobble. It's not going to be as steady as we want it to be. And truly, I think that when we actually think about our own virtual classroom sessions, maybe they're not as stable as we want them to be. So let me pause. I'm going to remind you again, if there's any questions that you've got, go ahead and put them in chat. But I'm also going to ask you a poll. I'm going to ask you, which of these three stabilizers do you think your team could improve upon? So I'm going to bring those back up on screen, in terms of thinking about this virtual classroom platform. So getting a better understanding of the tool set, the technology, how it works. Much more about using the actual tools themselves. And remember back to that very early set of statistics I shared with you, where 68% of the audience didn't understand the technology. 90% of them didn't understand how to use the tool set and said they weren't leveraging the potential. So you can see those results coming in there. Pretty much most of you saying, in terms of where do you think your team are, it's that developing the virtual classroom skills. Now, in today's session, I'm going to give you away quite a few of those in terms of just helping to get your thinking, get your mindset in the right way for actually moving training from face-to-face to virtual. There's a whole series of different ebooks that we've done with MeetingOne. We're going to give them away. It's holiday season, so we are going to actually do that as we go forward. Okay, seeing plenty of comments there. Again, let me remind you, go ahead and put in questions into the Q&A. This is your session. I want you to actually be able to answer what we actually want you to. You know, there's questions you're going to have. There might be burning issues that you're having to overcome. I really want to help you because really, part of it is about us getting the success right and getting it ready. And to do that, I think what we actually naturally have is what I regard as the three states, a kind of 3 states of readiness, 3 audiences, if you like, 3 groups that we need to pay attention to. And that's going to build out the rest of our session today. Because when I think about getting the states or these audiences ready, I think about it first and foremost from the organization perspective. You know, the organization that we work for or work with. I think about it from the learner perspective. Are we getting the learner ready to actually learn in the virtual classroom? And definitely, and it was the key element that you all spoke about there, is are we getting the delivery team ready? In other words, our instructional designers, our facilitators, and importantly, our producers. And we'll talk to those 3 roles a little later in the session. But for me, the first part really is for us to ensure that when we actually think about it, we're thinking about it from an organization perspective. How are we making sure that the organization is embracing virtual classroom technology? Now, you may turn around and think, why does the actual organization need to embrace the technology? Well, like everything else, in any organization, there's a kind of drumbeat that goes on, a kind of internal marketing that's happening within the business. And if you've started to deliver virtual classroom sessions and they're not being received well, guess what's going to happen in that drumbeat? Your audience, the internal audience, are actually going to be talking in negative terms about the virtual classroom. That the technology wasn't actually interactive, that I didn't enjoy that actual experience. And that's not going to be good for anyone. So part of it is for us to ensure, as learning architects, as learning professionals, is very much around making sure we correct the attitudes that happen and that we've got the right sense of attitudes going on. So it's about ensuring that the organization from the top down is embracing virtual classrooms. There's this whole sense that virtual classroom can often be seen as being, we'll provide training to the individual contributors. They'll take virtual classroom. But executives, senior managers, no. We want them to be traditional face-to-face training. I've got to confess that over the last 10 years, a lot of programs that I've seen very successful are actually at the very top. Top leadership, executives, who are ultimately heavily challenged for time using these technologies. And getting a lot of benefit from it because they're the ones that are probably more time crunched than anyone else. So it's important for us to actually help to get that senior team on board and talking about virtual classroom. Of course, by far, the most obvious group within the organization is the delivery team. And there's a sense of we need to help that delivery team to work with the mentality that virtual classrooms can provide a more engaging learning experience. What can often happen is organizations will make a decision that we're stopping doing some face-to-face training and we're going to start doing some virtual. And the drivers might well be we need to cut back on costs or, and if we don't put out the right message, then what actually happens is that the audience think, oh, we're doing it because of saving money, rather than actually doing it because it helps the 21st century learner. It's a much more modern learning experience. And that's absolutely key for us. Because, I do think that in a lot of organizations, individuals will maybe see virtual classroom not being as effective as face-to-face. In fact, they may actually turn around and say, well, face-to-face training is number 1. Yeah, virtual classroom might come as second place and e-learning might come into third. But that's not where it needs to be. It's not about one modality being better than the other. In the research that's actually been done across all of the different training methods, whether it's face-to-face, whether it's e-learning, whether it's virtual classroom, there has been no significant increase or decrease in learning ability. Let me repeat that. There's been no significant increase or decrease. Face-to-face learning is not that much different to virtual in terms of the success of the learning that takes place. And in fact, you've got an opportunity to actually, or you will have an opportunity to download an ebook in just a second. But let me just ask you, we're going to ask you a poll here, how does your organization, your trainers or your learners, view virtual classrooms as a delivery method? And I'm going to pick up, Tim, you've got a great comment there. Support is so important with this, with an organization. You asked about virtual need to be held and supported. Yep, I mean, look, there's some sense that within any organization, we are employed as the learning professionals because we are that. We're professional at the learning that we want to put together. Well, surely we should be recognized as, if we say and suggest that we want to deliver a piece of content in virtual classroom, it's not because of any other reason than it's the right platform to actually use. It's not necessarily a face-to-face requirement. We'll give you a bit of a metric a little later that will help you in terms of looking at that. And you're so right in terms of thinking having the right why, and you'll see that in a second, is so important. As we look at these poll results, 28% of you've got individuals that are not convinced that virtual classroom can be as effective. We'll soon help you to sort that in a second. There are some champions in the business, but not many. 33% of you there. Glad that 30% of you are seeing virtual classrooms as an effective learning environment. As I say, we did an ebook. I also did an accompanying webinar to it, which maybe the MeetingOne team can give you a link to the actual archive for that actual recording. But we did a webinar called 5 Ways to actually make virtual training as effective as face-to-face. I actually wanted to call that session 5 Ways to Make Virtual Training More Effective Than Face-to-Face, because I truly do believe that if we actually design the session for a virtual classroom, and we have developed the necessary skills for our facilitators and our support personnel to run a professional performance, and every virtual classroom session, I do think about it as being just that. It's a performance. It's a show. If you think about putting on an amateur dramatic play and you think about, well, we need a stage, your stage is Adobe Connect. If you think about, well, you need props on the stage, they're your poles and your whiteboards and your breakout rooms and all the other tools. If you think about, well, we need actors to perform this, your actors are your facilitators, your presenters, your subject matter experts, and your learner audience. And clearly, we need a script to pull it all together. That's the learning program, the facilitator guide that you actually create. So for me, there are 5 ways that we can make virtual training as effective. Go ahead, download that. Love to pick up and hear your comments at a later date in terms of what you think about that. But if I think about it from the point of view of, the crucial element, and Tim, you jumped the gun a little for me. I'm glad you did, because you talked very much to, as an organization, one of the things that we've got to address is the why. If you're familiar with Simon Sinek, he's one of the top 3 most watched individuals on YouTube and TED Talk. He's got a TED Talk which starts with why, and he calls it the golden circle. Excuse me a second. So his whole sense about start with why, he talks about this golden circle, and he talks about how the likes of Apple and Google and other companies have marketed their product. Now, you might be sat there going, David, why on earth are you now starting to talk about something about marketing? Well, if you consider internally within our organizations, we are marketing our training. Whether it's marketing the latest training program, or importantly in our aspect right now, this different training modality, if we actually do what Sinek talks about, which is we always tell the what and the how, So what you're going to learn and how you're going to learn it, we're missing a component. Because what we're doing is actually speaking more to the function of what the learning's going to happen, what's going to happen in the learning. What we're not doing is the missing piece. And Sinek, in his TED Talk, actually talks about the why is actually the critical ingredient that's needed by the likes of Apple. You know, if you think about it, why buy an iPod? You know, you can turn around and say, well, what an iPod is, you know, it's a device that can actually have, you know, it captures songs, you can load songs on it. How can you use it? Well, you need a set of earphones and you can use it in that way. Great. Well, that's the what and the how. But the why, importantly, is why would you want to buy an iPod? Because you can hold 1,000 songs in your pocket. Remember Steve Jobs' presentation when he actually presented the iPod at the Macworld? So for us, I do think that what we need to be doing more and more within our training departments, training teams, within our organizations, is starting with the why. Helping that learner to understand, or that organization to understand, why have we made the move to virtual classroom? Why is this more important for the audience? What does it give them that maybe face-to-face does not? And there's so much that it actually does. So start with the why, and then we are actually more readily going to address any concerns that that learner audience might have. And as a result, they're probably going to actually pick up on the learning much better. They're going to actually take that content, that program, and be much happier with it. I'm going to pause a second. I'm going to pick up on a couple of different questions, some of the comments that have happened along the way. Got a question from Barbara. When training software use, the face-to-face trainer can see what the learner is doing and assist if lost. How can you do this with virtual classroom? Barbara, thanks for your question. You know, you're right. In some, and what's going to happen is virtual classroom is not going to be able to do every single aspect of the training programs that we do face-to-face. It's, you know, there's certain content you're going to want to have people in face-to-face. However, let me just share with you that what we can physically do is we can bring people into, you know, in something like Adobe Connect. We can put them into breakout rooms, and we can ask them to share back their computer screen. Excuse me. To share back their computer screen and show us what they're doing. So we don't need them to be physically in the same room with us. We can do it virtually. It's going to take a little bit of different thinking, different approach. You might want to have a set of breakout rooms open that you circulate to. And you're asking those different learners to actually show what they're doing. So it can be done. It's just a slightly different approach. Team, any questions that you want to pick up on that I've not seen? Let's see, there's a question there. Charles, everyone should watch that TED Talk in your opinion. You know, I'm 100% behind you in that one. Anastasia, you can let the students use their webcams, but as they speak is best so as to not slow down the platform. Many don't like to be on webcam. You know, I've got to confess, I think part of it is because we've not helped the learner to use these technologies, we don't expect them to do it. And it neatly actually brings us into the second stage that I want to think about, or the second state, which is really how do we get the learners ready? Now, some of you may go, what do you mean, learners ready? Why do we need to do that? Well, what I sense and what I see is that we often bring learners into these platforms and they have no idea how to use the tool. You know, if you consider, if I bring you into this platform and don't tell you how to use the tool, you don't know. You don't know what you don't know. And there's a stage of, you know, we talk about the stages of learning as being the conscious competence model. And what I'd like to do is just ask you, how many are you familiar with the different states of learning? The fact that we go from unconscious incompetence to conscious competence in learning. We then move into a conscious conscious competence stage, and then finally we move to unconscious competence. It moves from we don't know what we don't know right through to we do it automatically on autopilot. And I've got to confess that using something like Adobe Connect, I'm on autopilot all day long now. But when I first started using it, for me it was very much that unconscious competent. So seeing some responses there, familiar with them, felt all of them, especially when learning guitar. Yes, I see it every time I teach. It's funny, isn't it? We pretty much are all knowing and we all recognize this, but I think we don't allow ourselves the time to help the learners to recognize it. Or we're not helping the learners to overcome the frustrations of using the technologies for the first time. You know, and when we actually think about that, if you consider this whole sense of bringing learners together into the virtual classroom for the first time, it's a brand new environment for them. And it's a little bit like, I love this cartoon when I pick it up. It's a little bit like your best friend suddenly inviting you to go and play a sport like golf that you've never played before. And it gives you no instruction about what to bring with you. So what do? You bring the entire, you know, the sink and you know, everything. You know, our golfer here has brought with him a fishing rod, a cricket bat, a baseball bat, and a tennis racket. You know, in this whole sense of you've never played golf before, have you? Now, it's a funny cartoon, but I'm going to say to you that in a lot of instances, this is what we're doing to our learners in the first time they come to virtual classroom, because we're not getting them ready. We've not got them prepared for the actual session. So some of the things that we actually advocate as virtual gurus is very much things like creating a learner orientation. Now, you can do that as a precursor to them coming to the virtual classroom itself. You could do it as a piece of e-learning. Not great for people to watch and sit through. But you can do it, and one of the things that we like to encourage is doing almost like a technology audit. So as you're asking learners to join and you want to make sure they can join the live session that will take place next week, maybe do a 15-minute orientation which gets them into the platform, which actually gets and checks that they've got the right software. They can activate the actual Adobe Connect or whichever platform you're working with. They've got the right plugins and add-ins, that they can connect to the audio, that if they're using a computer headset, that can work for them. Taking that 15 minutes will save you so much time in the live session. It'll overcome so many of the challenges that we can overcome. You know, we then don't have that waste of time or that inconvenience, if you like, at the very start of a session where you've got learners going, I can't hear you in audio, or, you know, are you hearing me? You know, and the microphone's not working. So think about putting that orientation ahead of time. At the very least, think about putting it right at the very beginning. We always, at Virtual Gurus, ask our audiences to join 15 minutes early. If our content is 2 hours in duration and we want it to run from 2 till 4, we're asking everyone to join from 1:45 onwards. It allows us to do an orientation. It might allow us to actually get them using the tools. It allows us to troubleshoot through the technology. If you're running virtual classroom sessions and people are being invited to join at 2, and you've got 2 hours worth of training, you've got no time to do the troubleshooting without something having to give along the way. You're going to have to compromise in the learning somehow. We talk about setting the right expectations, and I'll come back to that in just a moment. The right expectations for the learner about how to be in this platform. And then finally, we want to provide enough time within sessions for learners to have the time and the space and to actually reflect. There's a large part of it which has got to be helping the learners to understand how the tools actually work. And if you think within the way we actually use these tools in the virtual classrooms, we've got everything from, we're going to use verbal response. We're going to ask you to communicate with us over the phone line. We're going to use things like the chat pod or the annotation tools. We might put you into breakout rooms. We might be using the feedback icons at the top, raise hand, green check, red X, and things like that. And we're definitely going to be using polls. So that's a set of tools that our learners need to know how to use. Otherwise, every time you use them, you're having to explain it. And one of the things that we do at Virtual Gurus is we provide quick start guides to our learners. As it's part of the participant guide, it's part of the joining instructions. It gives them a whole set of troubleshooting along the way. It gives them a sense of, these are the tools we're going to use, and here's a quick snapshot of how to use them. And that way, learners can have that information ahead of time. If you want a copy of it, drop me an email. You'll get my email address at the end of it. So we need to get that knowledge of the tools. We then need to actually work with their audience on what I like to call the expectations. What are the expectations that we need to set with you as a learner audience to get you ready for us to be successful learning online together? You can read these, and there's nothing too untoward around them. We're asking people to do things which will either help to overcome any of the technical issues that might happen with bandwidth and issues there. Equally, we're asking them to think about their etiquette, their behavior, how they're physically going to work with us online. And these set of guidelines, if you like, these expectations, we actually provide in every single program, and the intention there is for us to help the audience to understand how we want them, how we need them to prepare, because in the face-to-face world, you prepare the training room. In the virtual classroom world, the learners have actually got to do that, and we've got a challenge with it. So I'll give you a second just to read that. As well as that, you can download it. You've actually got the PDF there. I'm happy for you to use that all day long. I'm going to answer a couple of questions, then we're going to finish up with our final section, which is on delivery team. Andrea, is there a best practice in regards to knowing or identifying what content should be delivered face-to-face, online, and via recorded session? Andrea, great question. We're going to get into a section, probably in about half a dozen slides or so, where I'm going to give you a bit of a ready reckoner for actually thinking about how do you decide what goes virtual versus what goes digital, possibly. So we'll come to that. As well as there's going to be an ebook that you're going to be able to download, which is 6 Steps to Moving Training Online. Tim, I don't know the answer, but in your opinion, kind of a real balance of virtual and face-to-face, and what is that balance? Tim, I truly think we can. I don't know what the ratio is, and I truly think that the ratio is going to change and differ based on the content that we actually have to deliver. I like to now think about, if you consider the 21st century learner is under a lot of pressure. They're much more connected than they used to be. The information that often we want to provide them in knowledge is much more readily available through things like our best friend Google and the likes. And I think as a result, what we've got to do is to package the learning in such a way that is efficient, that still addresses everything, and do the balancing between, do we need to bring people face-to-face, or is that a good use of people's time and energy and budget, or are there much more efficient ways of doing it? I'm pretty certain that as we go into this next section, you'll see what I mean in a lot more context. When I talk about the delivery team, I'm talking about it from the point of view that we've really got a group of individuals that are going to deliver the virtual classroom experience. And with that group of individuals, I like to think of virtual classroom as being almost two sides of the same coin. In essence, we need both of them to make it work. You first of all got the program design. You may remember right at the beginning I talked about the fact that 88% of that audience using virtual classrooms said when designed correctly and when it's delivered well, in other words, it's designed for virtual classroom and it's delivered well with individuals that have got virtual classroom skills, then it's every bit as effective as good face-to-face training. I want to emphasize the good bit. Not just as effective as face-to-face. It was every bit as effective as good face-to-face training. So part of it, and I know that from the poll that you provided earlier, a lot of you did say, we've gone through this sense of making sure that our team is able to design for virtual classroom or being able to deliver for virtual classroom. Those upskilling programs. And that's very much what we focus on within Virtual Gurus, is helping organizations to get that internal delivery team to have the knowledge, the actual abilities, and the skills to design and deliver and support a highly impactful, highly engaging, but more importantly, a highly effective virtual classroom experience. You know, it's not just providing that knowledge piece. It's making sure that that competency, that skill set has actually been developed. Because the real challenge to us is as we move training from face-to-face to virtual, the challenge is that we're trying to fit this square peg into a round hole. You know, if you think about it, you've designed a piece of learning which you may have designed a year, 2 years ago, and it's being delivered to your people face-to-face. That program can go online, but not as is, not without adjustment or adaptation, not without thinking, well, that particular activity, this is how we do it face-to-face. How do I do that virtually? You know, that small group exercise that actually thinks about, I've got an audience of 16, let's break them down into 4 groups, give them a piece of flip chart paper, and then send them off to a corner of the training room. How do I do that virtually? You know, it takes a lot more thought, it takes a lot more preparation. And the reality is, as you move training from face-to-face to virtual, it can be done, but it takes a slightly different approach. It's about rethinking our design, not designing brand new from scratch. There's elements that we might want to keep face-to-face. There's elements that we may want to actually move to digital. And a large part of it is what I think is we need to rethink the knowledge piece in learning. If you consider, and what I'm going to ask you to do is go ahead, use the hand raise if you agree with me. How many of you would agree that in face-to-face training, we spend a lot of our time helping the learner to acquire or update or gain new knowledge? So go ahead, at the very top of the screen, you'll see the little hand raise icon. And I'm seeing hundreds of little icons telling me that you're all saying, yeah, we do. You know, I mentioned earlier Simon Sinek. Team, I'm going to ask you to put into the chat Ken Robinson. Sir Ken Robinson, as he is officially known, actually has probably one of the most viewed TED Talks in history. He actually talks about our education system is broken. And he's talking much more about the education system in terms of, I guess, K-12 or school children. But I truly think that our education system is broken full stop, whether we're actually educating our children or whether we're educating our corporate learners. It's not that it's broken and we can't fix it, but it needs us to change our thinking. It needs us to change our approach. And what Ken actually talks about is that our face-to-face training environment would be comfortable for a Benedictine monk from the 5th century. Why? Because that traditional face-to-face model hasn't changed very much since then. It involves us bringing learners together into a room, putting them in that room. An educator, a facilitator, a teacher provides that knowledge. We actually then, we might test, we might examine. And I think there's a large part of that we actually do need to change. And where I actually see that change and what I'm asking you to think about changing is the way in which we help the learner to acquire the knowledge. Because if you think about it, in most instances nowadays, we're training knowledge workers to use their brains in different ways. You know, it's less so that we're asking them to use their hands. It's less so about motor skills. It's much more about thinking skills or using the mind and the knowledge. So it's about presenting or negotiating or you know, handling conflict or emotional intelligence, whatever it may be. But it's about helping them to acquire new knowledge or to supplement the knowledge they've already got about a particular subject. Importantly, as we think about that knowledge transfer, and as Ruth Clark says, knowledge, content shared is not content learned. So we've given the learner the knowledge. We need to help them to process that knowledge. We do that through case study, scenario, role play. That's where the real learning starts happening, and ultimately that's where we actually start moving the learner to be able to apply the knowledge. And when we think about that, we think about it from the point of view of, as we're actually taking people into this blended learning approach, and as I said earlier, blended learning is not new to us. It is in that we've been using probably just digital and face-to-face before, but as you actually start blending using all of the modalities, all of the different training methods, the approach that we've got to how we provide that knowledge has got to change. And what I like to think about, and this goes back to one of the questions about, well, how do we decide about the balance between face-to-face and virtual? Or how do you decide, particularly around the knowledge piece, what stays in the virtual session versus what maybe actually goes into digital? So this is maybe where it would actually go into your LMS or into other content. So I like to think about that in terms of the knowledge itself that needs to be gained, the complexity, and also the actual collaboration need. So think about it from the knowledge piece. Is your knowledge what I would regard need to know? In other words, absolutely mission critical, has to be something that a facilitator delivers to make sure that the knowledge is landed, that it's clear, that there's no ambiguity? Or is it quite nice to know, and is it quite simple for the learner to gain that knowledge? We'll come back to complexity in just a second. But if it's need to know, I'm going to include it in my virtual session. It's going to be part of it. But if it's a nice to know element, it's something I can probably allow the learner to gain outside of the virtual event itself. It doesn't need that valuable classroom time to do it. And to some extent, this would actually still work in face-to-face training. As we look to provide our learning in shorter and sharper bursts, learners don't want to be in a 2 or a 3-day face-to-face program anymore. Partly because it's time out of their role. It's, do you actually learn everything in the 3-day session and apply everything? Is it an efficient way of us actually to learn? We can think about in terms of what is the complexity of the learning itself. Is it something that's quite complex to learn, and as a result would benefit and need a facilitator to be there as part of the learning process? Or is it quite simple for the learner to learn it? Because again, that gives you a very quick rubric for you to understand, well, if it's complex, you're going to need it in the facilitator-led session, whether that's face-to-face or whether it's virtual. If it's simple for the learner, can they actually gain it by reading a document or watching a video or a PowerPoint? Then don't put it in the virtual session. Don't use valuable screen time where the learner is having to go through it, because the learner will very quickly sit there and roll their eyes back in their head and think, oh my word, why are we doing this? The final piece is about the collaboration piece. In other words, does the learner benefit from that learning taking place in a collaborative nature? Now, again, if we think about that, collaboratively, it's about bringing people together to get a better outcome than if they did it independently. And if that learning or the learner does benefit from it being something we learn collaboratively, so it's maybe something where it's good to see people discussing it or role-playing it or running through scenarios, then again, simple, it stays in the session. But if there's no benefit, if they have no increase in benefit because it's actually something they could learn on their own, take it out. I think so often what we actually do is we pack so much into our face-to-face training content that we overpack it. We actually, it's almost like taking a glass of water and the glass is the brain that we've got in front of us, that learner brain, and what you're doing is just pouring water in and water in and water in, and eventually it's just going to overflow. So I think, going back to what I was saying about the likes of Ken Robinson, I think what we have to do is address the way in which we actually design our learning, the way in which we actually provide that knowledge piece to our learners, so that we're much able to actually provide something that's much more digestible to the learner, something that they can actually consume and work with. And when I think about virtual classroom, I'm just going to answer a question. I see a question there from Kim. And Kim, I honestly, truly had not looked at this before I decided to pick it up. And you're going to see why I'm sort of laughing in a second. What about hybrid courses that teach both in person and online? Do you think we could offer both simultaneously, or should they be separate? And truly, Kim, no word of a lie. I didn't read your question, but you're going to see with this next slide that whenever we think about virtual classrooms, generally the sort of conventional way of thinking about them is each learner is individually located somewhere around the world, and we're going to beam out to that person. Or we might actually be a much smaller audience. And we either end up in this situation of one-to-one, one-to-many. And that's the more conventional ways of thinking about virtual classroom. However, and going back to Kim's response there is what we call one-to-hybrid. And I've used this method many, many times over the years. I'm just going to pause for some water. And what we've done is you may have an audience, for instance, you have a facilitator, in my instance, I was based in London. So I'm in London, I'm in front of a computer screen, I'm projecting out to my learner audience. But because of the need to bring maybe people together, because of where maybe people were located, we ended up with clusters of learners. So I had a group of learners that were in Shanghai, a group that were in Beijing, and a group that were in actually Melbourne, Australia. And they were not individually at their own desks. They were in a conference room. All 3, 4, 5, 6 of them actually huddled around a computer screen. In some instances, if they had the equipment, the computers would actually be beamed into the projector, and it would be on the wall or on a television screen. So I think that when we actually think about virtual classroom, we can actually create that hybrid model quite readily, quite easily. You may go to the extent of actually having co-facilitators that are based in each of those 3 locations, or 4 locations, or 10 locations. To some extent, the sky's the limit. This technology is not just about us delivering training to the individual. It might be to a group of individuals that may actually need to be co-located in that room. There's so many different reasons, so many different ways. Beth giving us a comment there. We have an on-site team and a team of remote workers. We have to use a hybrid approach. Absolutely. Cortland, we use a hybrid approach extensively. It works really well. You need to have an educated presenter who engages the camera as another physical participant. Absolutely. And when we think about interaction taking place in the virtual classroom, we think about it taking place in 3 key ways. There's the interaction that's going to take place between me as the facilitator and you as my participant audience. I'm going to do that through dialogue, discussion, questioning with you. There's interaction that's going to take place between participants. So the facilitator sort of stepping back and allowing the conversation to happen, and maybe just, as the name suggests, facilitating the conversation and moving it along. And the other aspect is the way in which participants will actually interact with the technology, doing polls, doing questions, hand raise, and everything else. The key challenge for you here is if you start using the hybrid approach, the way in which you approach each of these different types of interaction has got to change. And to your point there, Cortland, about having an educated presenter who engages with the camera, it's absolutely vital. Because what you don't want to do is for any group, doesn't matter if they're co-located with you in the room, whether they're independent or whether they're co-located as a group, excuse me, You do not want them to have a different experience. And what I'll often do is if I've got a group that are co-located, I will have actually taken, the group's names, so there might be 3 or 4 people. I'll have them written down on a sheet of paper. And I'm not going to turn around and go, hey, Beijing, let's hear from you. I'm going to turn around and go, well, Guangxi in Beijing, can I hear from you next? And then I will actually systematically call on someone else in the room. Because what can actually happen is when you've got these co-located hybrid groups is you end up having groupthink or group approach to the way you interact with them. So, just to give you a sort of sense of, we're finishing off with delivery team here. For us, it's about making sure those individuals that are going to be working with you have the right skills. We work with MeetingOne, with strategic partners, in helping to take virtual classroom events to a different level, to transform those virtual events. And if that's something that you'd like to get additional information from, by all means, we'd love you to do that. However, one of the things that I'd really like to do is we're coming to that holiday time. We're now in December, so I can now use the C word of Christmas. For me, it's something I don't use it all year round until we get to December. So as part of the holiday spirit, what we're actually doing is we're going to give you as much as we can. This is a little bit like Santa Claus, and I know I've got a little gray beard, but that's where it starts and it stops. But this is a little bit of us saying we want to give to you. So what you're actually seeing on screen there is a whole series of different ebooks, worksheets, job aids, infographics that I'm pretty certain will actually help to start transform your virtual classroom sessions. We've got about 3 minutes left, so I'm going to just pick up on some of the questions that I can see in the chat and see what we've actually got. Debbie talking about, I've used virtual training when I'm explaining reports or results to large groups. I feel that online training is the best option for software training because users can see and navigate the software simultaneously. Absolutely. Tim, you talk about simplifying, simplifying the actual learning. The attention span of people being so low now, so you have to use your time wisely. Absolutely. I can remember probably about 10 years ago, I was involved in training salespeople and sales managers. And at the time, we were doing a 3-day event, face-to-face event, which was consultative selling skills for new salespeople. And, I didn't know what I know now, but at the time, I was challenging, is 3 days the right length of time for this? How much of that learning content, that knowledge, were those learners able to take through after 3 days? Was it a case of we were practically saturating their brains? Fast forward 10 years, I'm pretty much certain that the way in which we're now creating learning has actually been as a direct result of that. Brittany, question from you, what instructional strategies make a hybrid approach the right choice? I think it's less about instructional strategy and more about availability of learner audience. A hybrid approach is going to work well. I'll give you a good example. I was once actually working with a group at Unilever, and it was a virtual session, and this group were actually based in Singapore. There were 8 of them. And during the session, every so often, all 8 of them would drop off the session. They would immediately just be kicked out of the actual web conferencing. And I kind of stopped during one of the breaks and got hold of the actual leader over there. And I asked what's happening, and he said, well, it's quite normal. We've actually got a very low-cost internet router. It won't handle all of us being online at the same time. And what it's doing is periodically dropping us all out as we all try and get online. And I said, stop. Get one of you to go online, hook it up to a large computer screen. We'll run it that way. So that's probably more necessity because of maybe technical problems or technical failures. It might be because of availability of computer equipment. I think what does work particularly well in the hybrid approach is if you're actually training to retail customers, individuals in shops and supermarkets and the likes of that, where they may not have an individual contributor in the same way that a group of knowledge workers or office workers might have. Okay, so as you can see on screen, we've got now, if you want to get in touch with us, there's some more information there. I'm going to hand over the team because we're going to actually let you understand a little bit more about this 5-minute demo, and then we'll go from there.
David, thank you very much. I'd now like to give a short announcement. As David said, we'll be opening up a brief live demo of Adobe Connect in another virtual room. We invite you to join us if you have any questions, or if you'd like to learn more about hosting your own virtual sessions, meetings, or webinars with Adobe Connect. You can go ahead and then click on the link that is marked as Join the Session Now, or select Schedule a Demo if you'd like to do one at a later time. And David, I'll turn the session back over to you if you have any additional closing thoughts or anything else you'd like to add before we do wrap things up today.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So hopefully what I've done is deliver on what I promised to you. Hopefully what I've done is given you a good sense of how can we start to help our audiences to embrace virtual classroom more than they currently are at the moment. You know, for me, I'm going to say thank you very much. You've taken a choice to spend an hour with a Scotsman on the phone in Adobe Connect to learn more about virtual classrooms. Hopefully, you've got a lot that you're actually going away with. What I'd like you to do is, if you've got any parting thoughts for me, please go ahead and put it into chat. Natalie, thank you. More energy to use the Adobe Connect platform. You know, I'm delighted that you're taking away from the session what you are. I'm going to wish you a wonderful rest of Wednesday. I know some of you at the latter end of the day, some at the beginning, and I'll be one of the first to wish you a happy holidays. So hopefully we'll see you online in the new year, but for now, thank you very much, and thanks MeetingOne.